So it's an honor and a privilege that Administrator Steve Dickson actually had time in his schedule. He was confirmed on August 12th, and he has been pulled in many different parts. But one of the first things, as soon as he was confirmed, I immediately sent him a text and said, we want to have you at CFS, because I thought it would be an outstanding time to introduce him to the CFS crowd, and certainly to the air traffic controllers. Not all air traffic controllers get to meet the administrator, and I truly think this is going to be a very productive hour talk. So please welcome Administrator Steve Dickson. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
This is my first big event.
Yeah? I'm
putting in your hands.
Okay. So you have a tremendous background in aviation, from being an F-15 pilot to being an officer in the Air Force to being a frontline pilot at Delta, and you've flown just about every airplane they made at Delta, right? Certainly, or that Delta had. The Boeing 727, 73, 75, 76, Airbus. A lot of knowledge, a lot of skill. You've worked with us very closely in Modernization and the Next Gen Advisory Committee as the subcommittee chair for many years. So you have a perspective that I don't think anyone has ever had walking into being the administrator of the FAA, which is pretty impressive. So I know you're prepared for it, but I guess the first thing I want to say is, what has surprised you in the first 30 days?
Well, I think actually your theme is very appropriate. Every day is a training day. New administrator, you think you know a lot about aviation after 40 years, and I'm finding out I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And I've got a tremendous amount of respect for everyone at the agency, certainly our controllers. There's a special kinship with pilots and controllers, as we've said many times, and it's a privilege. But I'm a new administrator. I need to be trained. This is a training day, so train me. I really look forward to learning and working with all of you and with everyone around the lines of business of the FAA to make this agency the very best that it possibly can be. I really believe that it is the gold standard in the world. And, but there's always areas that we can improve in, and that's what training's all about.
Yeah, can't take anything for granted, that's for sure. I want to talk a little bit about your 90-day plan and some of the things you want to focus on in your first 90 days, kind of set the foundation for the next 5 years as administrator.
Sure. Well, it's going through this confirmation process was an interesting experience. A lot of fits and starts to it. And as you're preparing for it, you're sitting down with leaders, Terry and her team, Ali Barami, Wayne Monteith Commercial Space, all the lines of business and all the staff offices, and learning as much about the reauthorization, priorities, and everything that's going on at the agency, but not in too much detail, because you're really, you're not on the job yet. I was still a civilian. And so I had a chance to sit down with the secretary a couple of times and get an idea of, what am I going to do? I knew that my schedule was rapidly going to be overtaken, and I wanted to have control over what my priorities were going to be to really hit the ground running. And so I took the opportunity during that time period to think about my confirmation hearing speech and what I would do, at the agency here in my first 90 days. And actually, I've got a piece of paper that I still have, and this is the way that I think. It's pretty simplistic, but it had 5 bullet points on it with an arrow across all of them that said continuous improvement, which is kind of where we get back to the training day. You're always trying to get better. And so those priorities, I actually merged 2 of the people priorities into one, and that formed the major themes or the major pillars of my 90-day plan. And those are, no surprise, the number one, safety, ensuring the public's trust in the FAA as both a regulator and an operator in the system, and I think the best in the world. And certainly I think the agency has done more to promote global aviation safety than any other agency anywhere in the world, frankly, including ICAO. So, you know, those are things, that's a good thing, you know, that we have been able to you know, export that around the world. We need to keep doing that and keep leading by example. A lot of those priorities obviously revolve around the situation with the 737 MAX, which I know we're going to be talking about. The second priority is stakeholder engagement, and that obviously includes working together with labor, with the industry, with you know, all the stakeholders, manufacturers, other regulators around the world, international agencies, and making sure, and the Congress, of course, you know, making sure that that we're as transparent and collaborative as we possibly can be. The third priority is global leadership. And global leadership, again, we've got the ICAO Assembly coming up. That'll be my second major event next week. You may have read about that, but I'll be leading the U.S. delegation along with Secretary Chow at the ICAO Assembly for several days next week. And we'll be working with the other international, my counterparts internationally there as well. And the fourth pillar is all around people. You know, the FAA is a big technical organization. We have subject matter experts. It's not that much different from an airline. You know, any technical organization, people tend to matriculate within their discipline. And that's really good. You know, you develop succession plans and you want to make sure that you've got backup plans and contingency plans if people get promoted or they move on into different roles. But that actually tends to reinforce stovepiping and silos within the organization. So it's really important to me that we broaden folks and we give them opportunities to see the big picture, and also that we are open to change. You know, our world is changing at an extremely rapid pace, and we need to stay out in front of that pace as a regulator and as an operator. It's difficult. It requires, you know, the last panel on collaboration is extremely important. It's very important to keep everybody in formation, making sure that we're not getting too far out in front of any part of the process, and that the system is able to digest those changes, both from a process perspective and a people perspective. So, you know, helping us to work together to manage that change can be really important.
I think that's aggressive, 90-day plan, but I think it's. I think if you don't set goals in life, you're never going to obtain them, right? You never, and I think those four pillars are perfect. When I saw that during the MAC discussion that we were having, I wrote them down as you were giving us an update, and I thought, oh, those are perfect. But I do want to kind of combine two of them right now and get to the Boeing 737 MAX. I want the safety and the global leadership. Given you're inheriting something that obviously did not happen on your watch, but we were the last country to ground the fleet, right? It started being grounded around the world. The United States was the last country to ground the fleet, and there's a lot of chatter out there from the European, from EASA, from Canada, from Brazil, China, that even if the United States certifies this aircraft safe to fly, they're going to go through their own process. So I think for the first time, I think we see as the United States that, quite frankly, maybe our FAA world, our gold standard might be tarnished a little bit with the Boeing 737 MAX. What's your plan to tell us methodically how you plan to bring it back up once you were satisfied? You are going to sim it. I did read that in a news clip just recently that you're going to sim it, or have you simmed it already?
No, that's what I'm headed up to Seattle later on this afternoon to do just that,
So,
look into it myself.
But how do we get from, okay, all the certification process seems good, the airplane seems airworthy, seems safe, you're going to sim it, possibly even fly it. and then bring it back online. But how do we get the rest of the world to say, we're with the FAA?
Well, you know, it's obviously the question of the day, right? And I think that the healthy part of this process is that I can't think of a process that's been more transparent and more inclusive when you're talking about this subject and what we're going through right now. And we have to be humble enough and conduct ourselves in a way that we're, you know, we've got our heads held high, but we can always improve, we can always get better. And we are involving an unprecedented number of certification authorities right as we go along, you know, with this process. I'll be briefing 50 regulators up in Montreal next Monday on our status. And, you know, it's not unusual for a certification authority to validate the work of other certification authorities. When Airbus equipment was certified by EASA, we do our own validation flights here in the US, the FAA does. So that's not really anything new in and of itself. But we are obviously in a little different paradigm right now. Again, we welcome the scrutiny. I don't want to put my thumb on the scale and say, you know, we need to do X, Y, or Z right now, because that's what these independent reviews are for. The Technical Advisory Board, the Joint Authorities Technical Review, the Special Committee on Aircraft Certification has really some very honest and capable industry leaders on it. There's the IGs looking into this, Congress looking into this. And so we'll need to make sure going forward that any adjustments that need to be made in the process that we're properly resourced. We have the legislative construct with Congress to do it. But with respect to the MAX, the airplane's not going to fly again until I'm satisfied that it's ready to go and that I would fly it and put my own family on it.
Excellent. So when you get to that point, if you get to that point, that it's airworthy, safe to fly, you would put your family on it. You're going to fly it possibly after it's certified. What if the other countries don't come along?
Well, you know, it may get to the point where we have to make our own decision.
Okay.
And we have, again, we are working very hard to keep everyone aligned. We've had good alignment at the technical level, and we'll just see how things develop. Not everything is knowable right now, because that's, you know, we haven't seen the final system architecture from Boeing. We're very close, and when I say system architecture, it's more than 500 pages of technical material that we're reviewing. The whole software architecture and the flight control system architecture, as well as the integrated system safety analysis. Once we have a chance to review that and make our assessment, then we will move back into the human factors portion of it, evaluating the performance of U.S. and international pilots in the engineering simulator, and then after that we'll move forward. So it's going to be some time before we complete that process. Okay,
so in the theme of every day is a training day, and the way pilots embrace training, come off the line, do a week of sims, get check ride out, to make sure they experience things that they normally won't experience through their regular course of, through a year. They might not experience an icing, a situation that they're going to run through a sim. Is there a different level of training for our pilots in the United States that are flying our aircraft than some of the other countries around the world?
Well, we're taking a paper forward to ICAO next week, advocating for global, looking into global training standards. And there's certainly different regulatory requirements that we do see around the world. Some of the methods of training pilots internationally are not permitted within the United States. But I think, again, it's something that we need to be very open about and collaborative about. Make sure that we're not arrogant and saying, hey, we're always doing things the best way. But certainly, and we have benefited over the years from a very high proportion of experienced former military pilots, experienced regional pilots going to the mainline carriers. We have our first officer qualification rules out there now, which have been very successful. But it's always, what's the next best thing? What's the next best thing to train? Is there an opportunity to introduce things like mixed reality, virtual reality, to make the training more sophisticated, more scenario dependent, less part task? those kinds of things we need to continue to innovate and evaluate as we go forward and see how they fit into the whole training construct.
As a pilot and in the military and certainly frontline pilot, Alpha pilot for Delta for many years, and then the Vice President of Operations for Delta, or Flight Operations for Delta. How important is that there is a culture that every day is a training day in the pilot world?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect flight. You know, even Chuck Yeager never flew a perfect flight. They're always, you know, we used to say in the fighter pilot community that the most important part of the mission was the debrief, because that's where you got together, decided, you know, how the mission went, looked at all the different perspectives, and then thought about what the opportunities would be next time to have an even better outcome. And we need to treat commercial aviation exactly the same way. I mean, all aviation really. It's always a learning experience, and there are always ways that we can do things better. That's what ASAP's about. That's what ATSAP is about, is basically get around the table, looking at what happened in a very collaborative, non-punitive way. And I always look, you know, when we had an event happen out on the line where we had a pilot who made a mistake, or maybe we had a situation where there was some question about what happened on a particular flight, I always looked at the system first. You know, did the system fail this crew? Was there information that we could have provided that we didn't? Is there something we need to address in training? And then you can always, you always would eventually come around to individual performance, but a lot of times you'd find out, hey, this is an opportunity for us to raise our game as an organization. We need to keep that mindset of continuous improvement, because I think particularly nowadays, you know, I talked about the pace of change, but look at all the new entrants coming in.
Yeah.
And the capabilities that we have out there in the NAS now, and the things that we're doing to make sure our controllers are current and qualified and our pilots are current and qualified. What we're doing today will not be good enough, you know, 5 or 10 years from now, because the system is going to continue to evolve and develop.
That's absolutely correct. And so let's just dovetail into modernization. As you could tell, as the subcommittee chair of the Next Gen Advisory Committee, I bet you've had many, many days being frustrated at the rate of modernizing within the National Airspace System. I sat in many meetings with you, and we through our NAC meetings, and the FAA would brief us out if we were red, yellow, or green on certain projects. And then, can you speak about how, as at that time, an outsider looking in, but getting to know the inner workings of the FAA, and how frustrating that could be?
Oh, I mean, nothing ever happens fast enough, right? So you always want to make things better, make it more, make your operation more reliable, make it more customer friendly, make it more, you know, employee friendly, make the job easier. And I think the challenge that we have, the funding challenge, actually, you know, your comments over the years about stable funding, I knew that was an issue. I didn't fully appreciate it until I got inside the agency at exactly what that means. Because in some cases, what we have been able to achieve in terms of new technology platforms has come out of other parts of the F&E, the capital budget. We need to address that. And that's something that I need as the leader of the agency. You know, that's a responsibility that I take very seriously, to make sure we're carrying that message to Congress and to the American people, and certainly up through the department as we develop budgets and plans going forward. You know, I just think that we've also got to be looking at how we measure our performance. You know, the ATO, the FAA, and the airlines and other entities that operate in the airspace tend to look at different metrics. And I've noticed a lot of progress in that area, but I think we need to figure out what success looks like. For Next Gen, we're facing, in addition to funding, we're facing some significant challenges with noise. And the better or more systematic and earlier engagement of communities, I think, has been helpful, but it's lengthening the time it takes to get some of these projects done. And there's a lot more to next gen than PBN. A lot of the operators think it's all about PBN. PBN's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not. You know, you've got a lot of other things that have to be done. Decision support tools for controllers, integrating systems more effectively to operationalize these capabilities and scale them around the system. I think that's the challenge. Right. A lot of the base technologies, probably 60 or 70%, are already there. It's a matter of tying them all together more effectively.
Yeah, it is a challenge, and we do have a problem with stable, predictable funding, and you got to look behind the curtain, and you can see how ugly it really is now, right? Because in the front, it looks great. We run a very safe and efficient operation, and we do it with not the best equipment, not the best staffing, but we do it with pride and passion and professionalism throughout the whole system. But, you know, we can't run this engine on the same motor oil for much longer, right? We will start to see a breakdown in the system, whether it is, you know, our infrastructure in our buildings, whether it is our radar structure, whether it is our approach structure. The noise community is very powerful, and you know, no pun intended, but they can make a lot of noise with just one or two people, right? So where do we go in modernization? How do we streamline this that we possibly can start deploying real-time technology within 24 months as opposed to having waterfalls that are going out to 2027, 2028?
We've got to make some commitments. We've got to make some commitments, and we've got to get alignment, you know, in the government on what's important and what's not. I think that it's difficult. The infrastructure discussions seem to focus on physical infrastructure, like highways and bridges, which are obviously really important, but things that you can't see, like ATC facilities and what the public doesn't see.
Sure.
You know, are more difficult, and we've got to do a better job. This is another challenge that a technical organization like the FAA or an airline has, is how do we tell that story in an accessible and in kind of a pithy way and make sure that we've got the alignment that we need to be able to get what we need. So that's a very high priority.
Okay, great. So one of your pillars is the people, and the FAA has great people, but they also have, for lack of a better term, people that have been there for a really long time and already started the clock on your 5 years when you're going to leave, right? Because I've always done it this way, I'm going to do it that way, and he's going to leave. There'll be another person, and then maybe that person will line up the way I'll do it. Either way, the clay doesn't budge, right? There's great people up top, there's great people on the front line, and then somewhere in between, great ideas get, you know, stuck in the clay, so to speak. Randy Babbitt called them titanium stovepipes, and his goal was to make it a high-functioning bureaucracy. I think that's an oxymoron, but you know, but I think at the end of the day, how can we penetrate the clay together? Because you have great people with great ideas and great initiatives. How do we penetrate the clay?
Well, we've got to look at the number of layers within the organization. I really want the FAA to be very bottom-up driven. You know, any organization has an organizational structure and a hierarchy. You have, you know, people who are in leadership positions who have various responsibilities to execute, and we'll work, you know, in a very team-oriented way. But it's very important that my senior leadership team is cohesive and they understand the value of a just culture in terms of making sure that issues are brought forward. And if you've got, you know, 15 layers to go through before you're finding out what's going on, you know, that's very difficult to see what needs to happen. So we'll look at where there are opportunities. I think it varies by line of business somewhat. We've got some of our lines of business are, you know, their mission, you know, the airports division, for instance, is dealing a lot with AIP grants and airport compliance. You've got commercial space, which is, you know, engineered to a different margin of safety because of where that industry is right now. But we need to bring everybody together and make sure that If we need to make organizational changes, if we need to look at spans of control, that we do that. But I think even beyond that, though, having an open and transparent culture. I'll use ATSAP again as an example. We don't want to have to rely on people necessarily going to their boss all the time to get things approved. We want a way to be able to get particularly safety data together and actionable in real time for the organization. That's what the airlines are doing. Yeah. And so I think that's really powerful. The other challenge I think we have is we've got a lot of data, but it's siloed into different purposes. One of the first questions I asked so you've got ATSAP for what's going on in the system, and you've got a SIAS, which is telling, which is what the air carriers are looking at, how they're feeding their performance in. Do those systems talk to each other? They really don't. And so how can we get at all of our data, make sure that we have consistent data standards, and that we're able to take a more holistic view as an agency, and that will function to help bring us all together, I think, more effectively as well.
Very good, very good. So we talked about modernization, we talked about the people, we talked about the funding. What else do you want to see as you move through your 5 years in the FAA? Do you have a 5-year term of, we're going to have drones flying in every city delivering packages. We're going to be launching commercial rockets into orbit from all these spaceports that we have around the country. How do you envision 5 years from now when you close up your planner, you walk out, they start walking on your portrait? What does that look like to you?
Well, I think it looks like, again, I think you can say it in one sentence, and we'll need to put some rigor and some numbers around some of this, but basically that the FAA is the world leader in aviation safety, innovation, and system performance in terms of efficiency by any metric, with a culture of continuous improvement. There's a tension between mission accomplishment versus safety. If you're at an airline, pilots are very mission oriented. They're very, they want to get the job done. But you have to give people permission to say, if there's a safety issue and you've got a concern, let's stop, let's talk to the ground control, let's pull off, let's set the parking brake, and let's get this sorted out before we go any farther. I want everyone in the agency to look at their jobs the same way. That's not an excuse for not moving things forward in a very aggressive and innovative way, but if there's ever a safety concern, we need to stop and figure it out before we move forward, and that's the kind of culture that we need to have in the agency.
As the Vice President for Flight Operations at Delta Airlines, obviously having enough certified pilots in your tool belt to operate the fleet and the schedule of Delta Airlines was very important. One of the things that we're very focused on is making sure we have enough air traffic controllers in the system, not only certified controllers in the system just to run the day-to-day operation, right, but to focus on modernization and technology, to really embrace every day as a training day. And I mean, having a vision that, controllers would come off the line for a day or two and go into some high fidelity sims like the pilots do. But that takes staffing, it takes money, obviously, and it takes the technology. How do you see the staffing of the controller workforce as we move forward in the coming years, knowing that September 30th is right around the corner? We might have to shut down the academy again one more time as we go into a government shutdown possibly, or maybe a CR, that they seem to be in the tug-of-war mode again. So how do you see the long-term focus on getting enough controls into the system to not only just work the operation, but to modernize and really enhance the safety of the system?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I could speak about pilots later, but I think with the controller workforce, it's not just the hiring, it's the whole training and qualification pipeline. And every time that gets interrupted, it creates ripple effects that can last, in this case, for years, right? So we don't want to do that. It creates a lot of pressure on the facilities, creates a lot of pressure on, obviously on controllers who are taking an extended time to get qualified. And I do think that we need to come up with ways to, as we talked about this morning on the last panel, how do we collaborate? We need controllers involved in the development of new technology and capabilities on the front end. We also need to be able to train effectively. So, definitely, I think that all of that needs to go into our planning calculations as we go forward. From what I understand, the actual hiring numbers are fairly healthy right now, but we can't rest on our laurels. We need to work broadly together to make sure that that young people see the value in an aviation career. We spent some time up at Vaughn College to see what they're doing. I'm on Friday going to visit an aviation high school up in Seattle, and I think that the FAA's got a bully pulpit that we can use to convene different stakeholders, whether we're talking about pilots, controllers, technicians, engineers, whatever the case may be, that aviation is a great career and it's something we all have a passion for and something that young people should consider.
So as the FAA administrator, and there's a lot of talk about a pilot shortage, do you see that as one of your focuses, that you have to focus on making sure there's a streamline of pilots coming into the system?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got some, you'll see various aspects of imbalances in pilot qualification and supply. There are some areas that are fairly healthy. There are others where there's a wave. We're in a wave of retirements right now at the major carriers. That's creating a lot of opportunity. But again, are young people seeing this? Are they coming in the numbers that we need them to come in? And so there's some things that we need to do. The Secretary had her Forces to Flyers initiative. We need to support veterans as they're making the transition. And we need to also find ways to make the career path a little less opaque than it has been in the past.
Less expensive?
That's one aspect. So I think it's expense is a factor. It's not the only one. If you could see what that path looks like and have some degree of certainty of where that you're going to be able to get to your goal, and that it's not going to take 10 or 15 years to get there, there's some amount of financial risk that some people will take, but it's not infinite.
Right.
And their value proposition has to be there. So I think that there's definitely some things that we can do in the government and also working with the private sector to make sure that the pipeline is healthy.
And the same thing probably goes with technicians, engineers. The sexy jobs are to go work for, the Googles and the Amazons of the world, right? Or SpaceX or Blue Horizon. They're doing the sexy stuff as opposed to we're just doing basically just doing the aircraft maintenance, or we're doing something just routine with with air traffic control equipment.
Right. But that's an interesting point, though. There are actually opportunities, though, for those kinds of skills in our aviation sector, right? What the skills that you needed in an airline 20 or 25 years ago, we didn't have data scientists back then. And there's a lot of opportunity, even on the technology side. We're talking about integrating systems more tightly. So some of that will be done by contractors and vendors, but there's a good bit that we can do within the agency as well. So welcoming new skill sets in, I think, will be important, but then also giving them the aviation background that they need to be able to be successful going forward.
Interesting. And that's what we saw in Vaughn College when we were up there. It was pretty impressive, their whole operation.
I mean, if you think about it, this is I think it's the most exciting time that we've had in aviation. I said in my town hall, it's probably the most exciting time since the introduction of the jet engine, or maybe even the DC-3, because you think about all the unmanned systems, commercial space. I think the FAA over the years has certified something like 320 or 340 commercial space launches. We're going to have more than 40 this year.
Yeah.
And and the numbers keep going up. And we're working on ways to make that a more flexible process. It takes time. We've got 1.4 million small UASs that have been certified. We've got 147,000 drone pilots that have drone licenses. My son's one of them. In fact, he just got a new license so he could have my signature at the bottom of it. But it's nice that your son's a fan, right? But and we got about 400,000 or so that are being used in commercial operations, and a lot of desire to make that go even faster.
Right.
But we've got to be very disciplined. We certainly want to be innovative, but we've just got to be very careful that we're taking all the safety factors into account as we move forward.
Which brings a very interesting conversation, and I don't know if you're, well, you'll tell me if you're free to talk about it or not. What's your vision on the new entrants, the commercial space, the UAV world, of paying into the Aviation Trust Fund? Because the FAA is spending an incredible amount of resources that are coming from, in essence, their Airways Trust Fund that is, for the most part, coming from passengers buying tickets on commercial airlines.
Right.
And the resources are a lot of them are being diverted towards these new entrants. How do you see them in the future contributing to the funding of the FAA?
Well, that's a policy decision and a debate that we'll certainly have to have. Yeah. My position is if you're using the system, without saying I'm for user fees or anything like that.
Yeah, AOPA might be in the room.
No. I'm still bleeding. Probably some of my friends in the audience here.
Yes.
But if you're operating in controlled airspace, there should be some mechanism to be able to account for that activity. Yeah. And we'll have to have those debates.
It's a fairness situation, right? Especially when listen, I think commercial space is so needed. I'm very proud that we have companies that have really taken over the space industry for this country, because not too long ago we weren't doing the launches, right? They were coming from China and Russia, right. And now we're doing them. But when you look at the hundreds of miles of airspace that we block and keep commercial airlines either one on the ground or make them fly hundreds of miles out of their way, mm-hmm. In order to be protected for a debris field, or if the unthinkable happens, for a launch and a re-entry, and it's longer. I think it is a fairness thing when you look at that and you look at those passengers who want to fly down south during the winter, and we have launches going on, 40 this year, maybe 100 next year, and it might be an everyday occurrence, and it's just something we should have to look at, and there should be a fairness to that.
Absolutely, yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So your management team, you're having an offsite coming up. We've actually had to move one of our management meetings to accommodate that, and I thought it was a great idea that you're going to get them together and do an offsite. What's your message to them when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to running this agency and moving forward? What's your message to your management team?
Well, I mean, with respect to collaboration, is first of all, we have to collaborate as a leadership team. Now, I'll use Terry as an example. They've got a big organization to run. Really 2/3 of the FAA when you think about it. But we've got the other lines of business, and we need to look at ourselves as a team that is, running this aviation authority that we want it to be the gold standard for safety, for system performance, and innovation. And those equities are a little different depending on where you sit. And so as I hold her accountable for the ATC system, we need to make sure that we're not doing things at cross purposes for what we're all trying to achieve as an enterprise. And so the cohesiveness of that team, understanding different perspectives so that we can the sum total can be greater than the individual parts, that's really where we need to go. So we need to be able to collaborate at our level, because the most important job is not what's most important for my line of business. It's what's most important for the FAA and for the American people. And so that's really number one. In terms of collaboration within the workforce, we need to develop our people. We need to provide opportunities, and we need to listen to what they're saying. and walk that walk. We want to have, like I said before, when it comes to safety, we need to have a just culture. We need to have a mechanism so that concerns can be brought forward and actioned within the organization, no matter what your role is. On offsites in general, some people roll their eyes a little bit at that term, and again, this is a challenge that operational and technical organizations have. In my experience, you've got to every so often pull back up and see where that forest is. I think that's one of the great things about CFS. You know, it's a lot of work and a lot of resources to bring everybody together. But then when you get done with 3 days or so of being together and actually learn and share perspectives, you say, boy, we need to really do this more often. You know, we actually need more of this, not less.
Right.
And then people get back into their facilities or back in the foxhole, and it's back to the mission.
Exactly.
So you can do both. Yeah. My intent going forward is that we want to do 2 of these a year. This will be the first one. We're going to probably do one that's a fairly small group, and then we'll do another one that's more expansive leadership team to make sure that we stay aligned. And then I'm also trying to do some things to make sure that the message is getting out to the agency as well. I want to be as accessible and visible as I possibly can, as we move forward. So I'm anxious to hear, what everyone has to say and all the different perspectives, so that we can deal with it as a leadership team.
That's great. I think offsites are tremendously successful, right? You get to get the meeting, and you spend extra time, a dinner, the international group talking about pizza or a dinner or a drink, to start building that collaboration. Because I think you need collaboration amongst lines of business within the FAA too. Oftentimes, we as NATCA actually get put in the middle between lines of business of the FAA, and we have to be the bridge to connect them. And I think it shouldn't be that way. It definitely shouldn't be that way. And one of the things I think of, if some lines of business, if HR, LR, aviation medicine, GC, General Counsel's Office, if they were to make decisions based on what is best for the safety of the operation, I think that would be a tremendous way to look at the way to do business with the FAA.
That's the goal.
And you're an operational guy, and I know you're going to bring that in there. But I have to say it to you, because there are times when decisions are made, and it looks like the operation is second to a good HR policy. But we're running a very diverse aviation system. That should be first and foremost.
Understand. Yep.
So there's a couple minutes.
The only thing I'd say, Paul, is the pizza gin and tonic thing. I usually have beer with pizza.
Yes.
So I'm not sure. I mean, I like gin and tonic fine, but
I think there's fabulous wine to have with pizza.
Yeah. Wine works.
Yes.
Yeah, wine will work.
Fabulous wine. So there's a couple minutes left, and I really wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to this audience, which is, although majority air traffic control is very diverse. We have aircraft engineers, certification specialists here, airport people here, obviously a lot of FAA people. We have airlines here, as you've seen, in manufacturers, and international leadership is here. The floor is yours. What do you want to tell them?
Well, I would just say that it's a privilege to be with you. I'm very humbled by the opportunity. This was not a position that I aspired for. The dog kind of caught the car on this one. I was asked to serve, and I was very honored to have the opportunity. And I'm at a point in my career where I was very fortunate to have some success, and I'm anxious to give back, and I want to give back. So I'm also a big believer in servant leadership, and that means I view my job as to really provide the vision and the direction for the FAA. As part of the Department of Transportation, as part of the U.S. leadership in the world, and as part of this whole aviation ecosystem. But in doing that, my role is to make sure that you've got the resources, the training, the skills, the expertise, and the support to be able to take care of your families, concentrate on getting the job done for the American people and for the global aviation community. So I couldn't be more proud to be with you and all the stakeholders who are with us today. Many of you I've known for many years, and I want to thank you for also coming and participating. This is a fantastic event. I remember speaking on a panel, I don't know, I say 7 or 8 years ago. It's probably more like 12, but it's amazing. I had no idea how much it had grown and how successful it's been, and the kind of discussions that you guys are having. The participation of all the sponsors has been tremendous as well. So it's a pleasure to be with you, and I just look forward to serving.
Well, thank you. And it's a team effort. With David Grizzle as the COO when he came in, and Terry Bristol has taken some foundational stuff that David put down, and she has just flourished collaboration. And to see every one of our panels having FAA leadership there or moderating FAA leadership, it's what the conference should be, and it wasn't like that years past, and I hope it continues to grow, and I hope FAA leadership, there is this stigma of being in Las Vegas, but you think about it, and it just makes sense to do the conference.
Yeah, hopefully what happens in Las Vegas this week won't stay.
No, we got to bring it back, certainly back to our facilities, make every day a training day for sure. But I thank the leadership of the FAA. Dan Elwell did an outstanding job as the acting administrator for about 18 months. And he's going to stay on as deputy, I hope.
Yeah, Dan did a tremendous job, and I think our experience will complement each other well. He's much more familiar with some of the relationships around Washington than I am, and he's been I think we'll work well together.
Well, I just hope that you find your way back to CFS, and next year you stay for the Archery Leagues. I know you're very busy, in your first 30 days. And then, listen, your ultimate success is our ultimate success, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to make you the best administrator the FAA has ever had.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Paul.